Okay, so, Matthew 24. Jesus left the temple and was walking away when his disciples came up to him to call his attention to its buildings. "Do you see all these things?" he asked. "I tell you the truth. Not one stone here be left on another. Every one will be thrown down." As Jesus was sitting on the Mount of Olives, the disciples came to him privately. "Tell us," they said, "when will this happen? When will these stones be thrown down? And what will be the sign of your coming and of the end of the age?" Which they associate with the temple being destroyed. Jesus answered, "Watch out that no one deceives you. For many will come in my name, claiming I am the Christ, and will deceive many." Now, before we go any further, let's make clear again that this Christ means Messiah. It means the Anointed One. It means the King. It means he's the one that they've been waiting for. We read before about the meaning of Messiah and how in the Old Testament they anointed kings. They also anointed priests and prophets. As it turns out, Jesus will be all three of these things. Got a cat here. Come on, Timber, come on. Jesus will be a prophet, a priest, and a king, so he'll be the anointed in all of those ways. And different people in the Judea and Israel at the time had different expectations of what the Messiah would be. But it means anointed. It basically means a leader of some kind. And so he's saying there are going to be a lot of people that come along claiming to be the leader, claiming to be the anointed one. So many are going to come and say this, claiming I am the Christ, and will deceive many. You will hear of wars. Timber, please, please. There she is again, right there. Just do something. Just don't bother me. But yeah, sit over there. That's a good place. Just sit right there. Come on. Okay. You will hear of wars and rumors of wars. But see to it that you are not alarmed. These are not the signs, okay? These things are going to happen, but these are not the signs. Such things must happen, but the end is still to come. These are not the signs. So the false Christs are not the signs. The wars and the rumors of wars are not the signs, are not the sign. Nation will rise against nation, and kingdom against kingdom. Okay, that's going to happen, but that is not the sign. There will be famines and earthquakes in various places. All these things are the beginning of birth pains. Now, this all happened. In fact, the New Testament itself will talk about some of these things. The New Testament will talk about some of these famines. There's going to be a famine that happens later on in the reign of one of the Roman emperors, and there's going to be, so the New Testament will talk about some of this stuff. But this stuff did happen historically in the time between Jesus' conversation with the apostles here and the fall of Jerusalem. We've already read Mark, and he doesn't differ from Matthew very much in this case, so we'll just leave that. Now, these things are not the sign. Okay, these things are all going to happen. And by the time this account is being written, these things would have been happening. But this itself is not the sign. Then you'll be handed over to be persecuted and put to death. And you'll be hated by all nations because of me. We're going to read about that in the rest of the New Testament. At that time, many will turn away from the faith and will betray and hate each other. And many false prophets will appear and deceive many people. Again, he's talking about things that are going to happen in the lifetime of the apostles. The New Testament itself will cover some of this stuff in later volumes in time. This is not talking about something that's going to happen 2,000 plus years later at the end of the world. That's not what this is. Because of the increase of wickedness, the love of most will grow cold. That he who stands firm to the end will be saved. And this gospel of the kingdom will be preached in the whole world as a testimony to all nations, and then the end will come. Now that is one of the verses that trips us up. We read that and we think that hasn't happened yet, and so he must be talking about something that's going to occur in the future. Well, the New Testament itself disagrees. We may not like it because it's not literal, okay? We hear these words and we don't think this has actually happened yet. But in Colossians it says this. At the beginning of the book of Colossians, and right at the beginning, in Paul's opening prayer and salutations, he says in chapter 1, verse 3, "We always thank God, the Father of our Lord Jesus Christ, when we pray for you, because we have heard of your faith in Christ Jesus, and of the love that you have for all the saints, the faith and love that spring from the hope that is stored up for you in heaven, and that you have already heard about in the word of truth, the gospel that has come to you. All over the world, this gospel is bearing fruit and growing, just as it has been doing among you since the day you heard it and understood God's grace and all its truth." So when Paul considered that to have already happened, he considered in his day in Colossae, when he wrote the letter to Colossae in the mid to late 50s AD, he considered that to have already happened, that this gospel has already been preached around the world and is bearing fruit all over the world. So this again is not talking about something that's going to happen millennia later. Okay, he's talking about things that are going to happen in the near future. He'll say later on, within this generation. Okay, there will be people who are alive when these things happen, who are alive at the time Jesus is speaking, 35 to 40 years later. Some of those people, not many, a lot of them will not be, but there will still be some people alive when these things happen that were alive when Jesus spoke. So this is not talking about something that happened centuries and centuries to come. Okay, it is not. It is not talking about that. So, when you see standing in the holy place the abomination that causes desolation, spoken of through the prophet Daniel, let the reader understand. Again, that's a clue that these written accounts were put down before these things happened, because the readers still needed to know what the signs were. Then let those who are, so that's a sign. That is the sign. When the abomination that causes desolation is standing in the holy place, which was spoken of to the prophet Daniel, then let those who are in Judea flee to the mountains. So when you see that, that's the sign. These other things are not the sign. They were going to happen, but they were not the sign. And these things did happen. Again, the New Testament itself will cover some of them. And we can read in the works of Josephus and other historians in the 1st century AD that these things did happen. Okay, everything he's saying here, from verses 4 down to 14, were literal things that happened in the middle of the 1st century AD, in the decades between this conversation, which he's having in the year 33 or so AD, and when the temple fell in 70 AD. So they're about 37 years, 37, 40 years. This conversation happened either in 30 or 33 AD. And in the 40 or so years after that, these things happened. And we have plenty of historical evidence available to demonstrate that. The New Testament itself will cover some of it. The church will grow in its first generation while these things are happening. Much of the New Testament is going to be written in the background of these things happening. Okay? These are not things that are still to come 2,000 years from now, or more, from this point in time. These are things that were going to happen within their lifetime, within their ministry, within the first generation of the church, between the time they're having this conversation and the fall of Jerusalem, approximately 40 years later. But these things are not the sign. All these things are going to happen. They're facts of history that were going to happen. Jesus said they were going to happen. They did happen. But they are not the sign. The sign is the abomination that causes desolation spoken of to the prophet Daniel. Now, I could, and maybe I should, go into Daniel to talk about what this is. Let's go ahead and cover that a little bit, because we do need to understand how this links up to the book of Daniel. I'll do more of this later when we get done with this whole passage, and we'll kind of tie it all together. But the abomination that causes desolation is an event referred to in the book of Daniel a couple different times. So Daniel I don't want to get into too much detail about the book of Daniel. I've done the videos of the book of Daniel. By the time I upload this, I'll have those uploaded too, so you can go back and look at those. But the scope of Daniel's prophecy basically is to see the future from his time in the era of the Babylonian Empire all the way down to the time of the Roman Empire and the establishment of the kingdom of Christ and beyond. And during that time, from the time of the Babylonians to the time of the Romans, there are going to be these four successive world Gentile empires that are going to come along and dominate the world and dominate the people of God, the Jews, during that time. There's going to be the Babylonians who were in power when Daniel spoke this. Daniel saw the vision. He interpreted Nebuchadnezzar's dream in chapter 2 of Daniel. He had his own vision in chapter 7. And there's the Babylonians. Then there were going to be the Medo-Persians, and they actually came onto the scene while Daniel was still alive. They were going to get replaced by the Greeks, and the Greeks were going to get replaced by the Romans. And the Romans are going to get replaced by the Messiah's kingdom. And so during that time, then the kingdom was going to be turned over to the saints. And during that time, there were going to be these wicked kings that would come out of these kingdoms in the meantime that would cause trouble. And one of those was a particularly fierce king that arose from the ruins of the Grecian kingdom, a guy who was called by the name of Antiochus IV Epiphanes. He was a Grecian king from the territory of Syria, north of Israel, in the 2nd century BC. And he is talked about in Daniel 8 and in Daniel 10 and 11. And Daniel 8, in chapter 23, it talks about a stern-faced king, a master of intrigue, will arise. This is Antiochus IV Epiphanes, a historical figure that actually did come and go in the 100s BC. He'll become very strong, but not by his own power. He will cause astounding devastation and will succeed whatever he does. Actually, I need to go back and let's finish this. He will destroy the mighty men and the holy people. He will cause the seat to prosper and will consider himself superior. Okay, so that's the interpretation. Actually, the vision, that's the interpretation of that king. The vision he had about him was earlier in the chapter, and it said he was portrayed as a horn that grew until it reached the host of the heavens. It said it, this is the same chapter, back up a few verses, chapter 11. It set itself up to be as great as the prince of the host. It took away the daily sacrifice from him, which this man did in the 160s BC. And the place of his sanctuary was brought low. Because of rebellion, the host of the saints and the daily sacrifice were given over to it. It prospered in everything it did. And then I heard a holy one speaking, and another holy one said to him, "How long will it take for this vision to be fulfilled? The vision concerning the daily sacrifice, which Antiochus IV Epiphanes caused to cease for 3.5 years. The rebellion that causes desolation, and the surrender of the sanctuary and of the host that we trampled underfoot." So that is, so he caused the temple to be desolate. It was a rebellion that caused desolation and caused the sacrifices to cease. Then in Daniel chapter 9, Daniel is getting a vision from he's praying about the restoration of the temple, and he's given an answer from heaven in the form of this messenger angel who comes to him and tells him this time frame in which all these things are going to happen and all these various tasks that God is going to complete. And he says at the end there in chapter 9, verse 27, I'm reading out of the footnotes, the alternate translation, because I think this is more accurate compared to the one you see by default in the main text. It says in chapter 9, verse 27, "One who causes desolation will come upon the pinnacle of the abominable temple until the end that is decreed is poured out on the desolated city." Okay, so this goes back to the idea that the desolation causes sacrifices to cease, and that there's going to be some kind of abomination that occurs that causes this desolation. So that is what the people at the time are being, the readers of Matthew and Mark, are being pointed towards. Luke makes this much simpler, and he outright tells us what this abomination that causes desolation is. in Luke, he simply said, okay, let's go ahead and read Luke's account here. Teacher, they asked, this is Luke 21, starting in verse 7. Teacher, they asked, when will these things happen? And what will be the sign that they are about to take place? He replied, watch out that you are not deceived. For many will come in my name, claiming I am he, and the time is near. Do not follow them. When you hear of wars and revolutions, do not be frightened. These things must happen first, but the end will not come right away. So he's basically saying the same thing, wording it slightly differently. Then he said to them, nation will rise against nation and kingdom against kingdom. There was a lot of inter-Jewish fighting. There are a lot of different factions within the Jewish, even within the Jewish people, who are fighting each other during this time period. There will be great earthquakes, famines, and pestilences in various places, and fearful events and great signs from heaven. But before all this, they will lay hands on you and persecute you. They will deliver you to synagogues and prisons, and you'll be brought before kings and governors, and all on account of my name. Again, the New Testament's going to talk about some of this stuff. This will result in your being witnesses to them. But make up your mind not to worry beforehand how you will defend yourself from them. For I will give you words and wisdom that none of your adversaries will be able to resist or contradict. Again, we'll read about this in the latter part of the book of Acts, and in the book of Acts in general. You will be betrayed even by parents, brothers, relatives, and friends, and they will put some of you to death. All men will hate you because of me, but not a hair of your head will perish. By standing firm you will gain life. And here's the key verse. When you see Jerusalem being surrounded by armies, then you know that its desolation is near. So Luke does not bother with all the coded references to the prophecies of Daniel. He simply says, when you see Jerusalem surrounded by armies, then you'll know the time is near. Its desolation is near. The abomination is here. The daily sacrifices will cease. The temple is going to be destroyed. It's going to fall. Then let those who are in Judea flee to the mountains. Let those in the city get out, and let those in the country not enter the city. For this is the time of punishment and fulfillment of all that has been written. How dreadful will it be in those days for pregnant women and nursing mothers? There will be great distress in the land and wrath against this people. They will fall by the sword, and will be taken as prisoners to all the nations. Jerusalem will be trampled on by the Gentiles, until the times of the Gentiles are fulfilled. That's Luke's account. We'll go back to that when we get to the book of Luke. But Luke makes it clear what the sign is. It's when Jerusalem is being surrounded by armies. Matthew and Mark both have these coded references to the book of Daniel. But Luke drops that and just says it's when Jerusalem is surrounded by armies. The abomination is here. It's going to cause desolation. It's going to cause the temple sacrifices to be stopped. And it will. And the temple sacrifices will in fact be stopped and will never start again. It's going to be the fall of the temple. And that's going to happen. And that actually happened before the fall of the temple itself. Jerusalem. Okay, so the Roman-Judea War, which culminated in the sack of the city of Jerusalem and the destruction of the city and the temple, we talk about it a lot in terms of that particular event. And that is, in fact, what they're talking about here. But that event was part of a longer war, which itself had, as we see here, many things that led up to it. The war itself started in the year 66 AD. The fall of the temple happened in the summer of 70 AD. The siege of Jerusalem happened in the summer of 70 AD. I believe the fall of the temple itself happened on August 9th of 70 AD. It was the same day of the month, same day of the year that the temple fell to Nebuchadnezzar in the days of Babylon 600 plus years before. Same day in the calendar. But before that, there was a war. Before the Romans destroyed the city, they had to surround it. Before they surrounded the city, they had to get to it. And before they got to it, they had to go through the rest of the country to get there. And they actually started doing that a few years earlier. Now, the guy who will end up taking the city is a dude named Titus. Okay, he'll be in control of the armies when the fall of the sack of the city happens. Titus is the son of a guy named Vespasian, who was the general who started the war, or who got to Jerusalem, and then he had to leave and go to Rome to put down the civil unrest that was going on in Rome after Nero committed suicide in June of 68 AD. So while this war is happening, Nero commits suicide. There's a tremendous amount of strife in Rome. 3 different guys come along and become emperor, claim to be emperor, and they all die within a couple of months. So the empire itself is verging on coming apart. Vespasian, who is currently in Judea fighting this war against the Jews, goes to Rome to put down the civil unrest and become emperor. And he leaves his son in charge of the war in Judea. He's the guy in charge when the city falls and the temple is destroyed. But before Vespasian got there was another guy who started the war. His name was, what was his name? Gaius Callus Festus or something like that. He was, I'll check it before I start. I need to look up his name to be specific, but it's something like Gaius Callus Festus or something along those lines. And he actually was the guy in charge of the 12th Legion, when the war started in 66 AD. And he even got to Jerusalem in the fall of 66 AD. He even got to Jerusalem and almost took it. They surrounded the city and were in position actually to start burning down the walls. But for whatever the reason, he left. He was not an army commander. He was not an experienced military figure. And he apparently had lost some of his supply lines through, I guess, sheer incompetence. And he was concerned, and it was late in the fall. It was October and November when this happened. And apparently he was concerned that with the winter settling in and with his supply lines having been lost, he would not be able to prosecute a siege against Jerusalem, even though he was very close to capturing the city already. So he left. Okay, and then they chased him. Obviously, the Jews, the fighting men of who were in the city, and the rebels chased them and killed them. You know, the army commander himself survived and died in disgrace not long later. But they chased him and wiped out the entire 12th Legion. Of course, this really motivated the Jews, and that's really what started the war. So then the Romans came back, and then the rest of the war happened, and the Jews, of course, lost. But they won that initial round. They were almost, if the guy had finished taking Jerusalem, the war would have ended in 66 AD and would not have continued on for 7 more years. But he didn't. He was there. He was on the doorsteps. He was about to burn down the door, and he left. And then they came back later with more legions, and it didn't turn out so well for the Jews that time. And that was really the start of the war, because the Jews chased the fleeing army, wiped them out, wiped out the entire 12th Legion, and that angered Rome, and they sent more troops to Judea to put down this rebellion, and they did. And that is what led to the destruction that Jesus is predicting here. So that, I believe, is the actual sign. The actual sign of Jerusalem being surrounded by armies, I believe, is when it was initially surrounded in the fall of 66 AD, and then the guy in charge at the time backed away and left, giving people time to get out and get moving before the Romans came back, which they did. That, I believe, is the actual sign. So when you see standing in the holy place the abomination that causes desolation, spoken of to the prophet Daniel, let the reader understand. So in other words, when this abominable thing is about to happen, that's going to cause desolation, that's going to cause the sacrifices to cease, and the temple will fall, then let those who are in Judea flee to the mountains. So when the armies retreat, when the armies surround Jerusalem and they don't take the city, that's your cue to leave. That's your cue to escape, because they're going to come back, and there will be no escape once they come back. Let no one on the roof of his house go down and take anything out of the house. Let no one in the field go back to get his cloak. You don't have time to waste for anything. If you want to save your life, you got to go. When this sign happens, it's time to move. How dreadful it will be in those days for pregnant women and nursing mothers. Pray that your flight will not take place in winter or on the Sabbath. For then there will be great distress, unequaled from the beginning of the world until now, and never to be equaled again. And if those days had not been cut short, no one would survive. But for the sake of the elect, those days will be shortened. Now this goes back to Daniel. This is why I was going to wait until here before I went into Daniel, but I did it earlier anyway. But this links up with the end of the book of Daniel. So we know now that Daniel is talking about the same thing that Jesus is talking about. This is at the end of the book of Daniel. Daniel chapter 12. At that time, Michael, the great prince who protects your people. I believe this is Jesus himself, by the way. This figure that Daniel is speaking to Daniel comes along in chapter 10 and is described in the early verses of chapter 10. I believe this is Jesus himself in a pre-incarnate phase. I believe this is the angel of the Lord. I believe this is how he looked when he was the angel of the Lord to people in the Old Testament who saw the angel of the Lord. I believe this because it links up extremely well with the description of Jesus in the beginning of Revelation. There's no doubt that's Jesus. I believe the difference is that in this context, in Daniel 10, Jesus had not yet been manifested, had not yet died, had not yet been given authority over all the world, as he says he has been given at the end of Matthew. And that's the difference in the portrayal of him in Daniel 10, 11, and 12 versus Revelation. But I believe it's the same guy. I believe it's Jesus in his angel of the Lord form, talking to Daniel. And he says in the beginning of Daniel 12, at that time, Michael, the great prince who protects your people, will arise. There will be a time of distress such as not happened from the beginning of nations until then. So that's the same thing. That's the same language that Matthew picks up on here. So talking about the events of the fall of Jerusalem. Now remember, in Daniel's day, the temple has already fallen. It fell once before, and Daniel wants it to be rebuilt again. He wants it. That's what he prayed about in Daniel 9. You'll restore your city and your temple, God, for your sake, not for ours. We don't deserve it, but for your sake, for your reputation, for your glory, Lord, rebuild your city and your temple. But he's saying here, we're reading here, that it's going to fall again. The temple is going to be rebuilt. He gets the answer from the angel that yes, it's going to happen. He gets actually more than he bargained for. He gets more of an answer than he actually asked for. And he finds out here in chapter 12 that the temple is going to fall again. So what has happened to them already at the hands of the Babylonians is going to happen again. There will be a time of distress such as not happened from the beginning of nations until then. But at that time, your people, everyone whose name is found written in the book, will be delivered. Multitudes who sleep in the dust of the earth will awake, some to everlasting life, some to others to shame and everlasting contempt. Those who are wise will shine the brightness of the heavens, and those who will lead many to righteousness, and the stars forever and ever. But you, Daniel, close up and seal the words of the scroll until the time of the end. Now in Revelation, they're going to open the scroll. In Daniel, they close it. Many will go here and there to increase knowledge. So then Daniel is listening to these angelic beings talking to each other, and they ask, how long will it be before these astonishing things are fulfilled? And he says, for time, times, and half a time, is 3.5 times, incomplete, period of 7. When the power of the holy people has finally been broken, all these things will be fulfilled. So that's what's going to happen. The power of the age of the age of the national state of Israel is going to end, and the power of the people, the holy people of Daniel's day, would have been the righteous Jews, and that power is going to be broken. And if those days had not been cut short, no one would survive. That's how terrible they're going to be. But for the sake of the elect, those days will be shortened. And at that time, if anyone says to you, look, here is the Christ, or there he is, do not believe it. Now, there were tons of false leaders at this time. Okay, like I said, the Jews are never going to win this war anyway. The Romans are just too mighty. But a big part of the reason why they couldn't put up another fight is because they spent so much time fighting each other. There are so many factions within Judaism that were fighting each other for control that they couldn't mount a united opposition to Rome. For false Christ and false prophets will appear and perform great signs and miracles to deceive even the elect, if that were possible. See, I have told you ahead of time. So if anyone tells you, there he is, out in the desert, do not go out. Or, here he is in the inner rooms, do not believe it. These are people who missed the Messiah when he actually came, because he's there right now speaking to them. These are the people in the crowds who didn't want this Messiah, but want another one who will fight off Rome. And they're going to fall victim to all these liars who will come along, and there will be plenty of them. For as lightning that comes from the east is visible even in the west, so will it be at the coming of the Son of Man. That coming is what they talked about at the beginning of this question. When will be the sign of your coming? You'll know. When it happens, don't fall for all these pretenders and these fake messiahs who come to pretend to be the Messiah but are not. Because when the coming of the Son of Man comes, you will know. There will be no question, no doubt. Wherever there is a carcass, there the vultures will gather.